When you beg, you're not just asking for attention, you're surrendering your value. Every plea, every second of trying to prove your worth to someone who doesn't see it, chips away at your self-respect. You think you're holding on, but in truth, you're letting go of your power, your dignity, your image in their mind. And whether they admit it or not, they feel it. The more you cling, the more they push away. The more you chase, the more they run. Because desperation never attracts, it repels. In their eyes, you become smaller. Not because you are, but because you're showing up like someone who doesn't believe they deserve better. And that's the twisted thing about human nature. People don't always value what's easily available. They become entitled to it. They expect it, and they stop respecting it. That's why the most powerful move you can make is to stop begging and disappear. See, most people think presence equals power, that being there, trying harder, giving more, will fix things. But in reality, presence without value is just noise, and noise gets tuned out. Your constant texts, your repeated explanations, your emotional availability, they all turn into static. But the moment you stop, the moment you go silent, that's when things shift. That's when they start to notice. And more importantly, that's when they start to question, why did you stop? Where did you go? Why aren't you fighting for me anymore? That's the power of withdrawal. It forces reflection, not just in them, but in you. Because the truth is, the need to beg doesn't come from love. It comes from fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of not being good enough. But fear can't guide power. And it certainly can't sustain respect. Begging doesn't come from strength. It comes from scarcity, and people can feel it. They can sense when you're showing up not because you're confident, but because you're afraid. That fear shows in your eyes, in your words, in your tone. And they feed off it. But when you disappear, when you stop giving them the emotional fuel they've been feeding on, they starve. Not because they miss your presence, but because they miss the control. They miss the comfort of knowing you'll always be there. That no matter how little they gave, you'd keep showing up. That even after disrespect, you'd still choose them. Disappearing doesn't mean ghosting. It doesn't mean revenge. It means reclaiming your space. It means recognizing that you've been bleeding energy into someone or something that was never built to nourish you. And it means turning inward not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because once you stop begging, you start seeing. You see who truly shows up, who reaches out, who values your energy without you constantly offering it. And ironically, that's when they start to panic. Because now they can't predict you. You're not reacting. You're not explaining. You're not chasing. You're simply gone. And that silence, that unbothered distance, it speaks louder than 1,000 words. They start wondering who has your attention now, who's hearing your laughter, who's experiencing the energy they once took for granted. And in that wondering, they begin to feel the loss. This is the part they never saw coming, because they thought you'd always be there. They thought your love was a leash. But what they didn't realize is that your love was a choice. And now you've chosen differently. You've chosen you. Don't beg for closure. Don't beg for clarity. Don't beg for respect. Give it to yourself. Walk away with your head high and your silence intact. Because the one who walks away without a word, without a scene, without a breakdown, that's the one they remember. Disappear and let the silence teach them what your presence never could. Silence is underestimated. It's often mistaken for weakness, for surrender, for having nothing left to say. But silence is rarely empty. In fact, it's one of the most powerful statements you can make, especially when it follows disrespect. When someone wrongs you and you choose not to engage, not to yell, not to argue, you're not giving up. You're rising above, because the truth is, silence has a weight to it, a sharpness. It echoes, it lingers. And unlike words, it can't be dismissed, twisted, or forgotten. People expect noise when they hurt you. They expect confrontation, tears, drama. It reassures them that they still matter enough to trigger you, that they still hold power over your emotions. And when you give them that reaction, they feel validated. Even if they're in the wrong, they feel control. But when you go quiet, that control vanishes. Suddenly, they're not sure where they stand. They're not sure how much damage they've done. And that uncertainty eats at them in a way your words never could. Silence forces them to sit with their actions. It creates a space where your presence once lived, and that emptiness becomes loud. They begin replaying everything they said, every moment they dismissed you, every time they thought you'd always be there. Now there's no response, no emotion, just stillness, and in that stillness they panic. See, when you argue, you give them clues. You show them you still care. You give them a sense of control over your attention. But when you stop responding, they're left with a void. And human beings hate the unknown. We crave feedback, even negative feedback, but silence is unfamiliar terrain. And that makes it terrifying. The beauty of silence is that it demands self-reflection, not just for them, but for you. It gives you time to breathe, to think clearly, to understand what you actually feel instead of reacting on impulse. It creates distance between the wound and the response. And in that distance, you grow. You begin to realize that not every situation deserves a reply, that not every person has earned the right to your explanation. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply not engage. When you stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, you set yourself free. You stop trying to prove your worth to someone who never saw it in the first place. You begin to value your energy, your peace, your presence. And they notice that shift. They notice the silence, because what used to be predictable, you chasing, you reacting, is now gone. And they don't know how to handle that. They'll poke, they'll provoke. They'll try to get a rise out of you, not because they care, but because they need to feel relevant in your story again. But don't give them that. Don't give them what they expect. When you remain still, when you don't respond to the bait, you stay in control. And that's where your power is, in not needing the last word, in knowing you could say something, but choosing not to. Silence doesn't mean you're okay with what happened. It means you've outgrown the need to argue about it. It means your peace is more important than proving a point. It means you've accepted that some people only understand when they feel your absence, not your explanations. They may never admit it, but your silence will haunt them, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. They'll wonder if you've moved on, if you ever really cared, if someone else is now benefiting from the love they took for granted. That wondering, that unknown, is often more painful than any speech you could have delivered. So when they expect rage and you give them stillness, when they look for a reaction and find none, when they come back hoping to stir the old emotion and see only calm, know that you've won. Not in a petty way, not in a game-playing way, but in the quiet, grounded way that only someone who knows their worth can win. Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy, it's peace, it's evolution, and sometimes it's the only response they deserve. Let them feel it. You don't always need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't always need to explain yourself to be understood. And you definitely don't need to fight to prove your worth to people who were comfortable ignoring it. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is simply to walk away, quietly, without announcement, without drama, without one final plea, just disappear, because your disappearance forces something your presence never could: reflection. See, when you're always there, always available, always trying, people get used to it. They start to believe it's guaranteed. That no matter how little effort they give, you'll keep showing up. That no matter how many times they disrespect your time, your love, your loyalty, you'll be back. They treat your consistency like a default setting, not a decision you make daily. And that's the danger of being too present for people who don't value it. But the moment you step away, the moment you stop chasing, calling, explaining, defending, they're left alone with something they've avoided for a long time: the reality of themselves without your presence. Disappearing isn't about punishment, it's about protection. It's about recognizing when your energy is being drained instead of appreciated, when your kindness is being consumed without gratitude, and when your voice has become background noise instead of something they truly hear. So you pull back, you choose distance not to hurt them, but to heal you, to make space for clarity. Because that space, that silence, says what your words couldn't, and that's when the shift happens. They start to notice the emptiness where you used to be, the quiet where there used to be effort, the peace where there used to be conflict. And that's when they start to panic, because for the first time, they're forced to sit in the aftermath of their own behavior. There's no distraction, no back and forth, no emotional noise to shield them from what they've done or how they've made you feel. People don't change when they're still benefiting from your presence. They change when they lose access to it. When the calls go unanswered, when the texts go unread, when your energy is no longer theirs to feed on. That's when they begin to reflect not just on you, but on themselves, on their decisions, on their carelessness, on the comfort they mistook for permanence. And what's even more powerful is that you change too. In that distance, you begin to see how much you were giving to someone who was never really giving back. You start to feel the weight you carried, the emotional labor, the chasing, the over-explaining, and you realize how exhausting it all was. You stop justifying their behavior, you stop excusing it with potential, you stop hoping they'll be who you wanted them to be. And you begin to accept them for who they've shown you they are. That acceptance is the beginning of your freedom, because now your silence isn't just a boundary, it's a statement, a declaration that you've outgrown the version of yourself who tolerated that kind of treatment. And even if they come back, confused, apologetic, suddenly full of the attention they once withheld, you're no longer waiting for it. You've moved on, not just from them, but from the emotional grip they had on you. The truth is, most people don't realize the damage they've done until the person they took for granted is no longer standing in front of them trying to be seen. Your disappearance becomes the mirror they can't avoid, and in that mirror, they finally see it, the disrespect, the neglect, the emotional laziness. They finally feel the weight of your absence because your presence was never the problem. Their inability to value it was. So let them feel it, let them sit in the silence, let them wonder why you stopped caring, because in that wondering, in that space, they'll find the truth you were trying to show them all along. And maybe, just maybe, they'll finally understand. Disappearance doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it doesn't announce. It simply leaves and lets the silence speak. Detachment isn't cold, it's not cruel, it's clarity. And if you've ever found yourself drained by people who play games with your emotions, you'll understand exactly why detachment becomes necessary. Not as a defense mechanism, but as survival. There's a moment after you've begged, after you've tried, after you've explained yourself too many times, when something in you just shuts off. Not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop trying to convince someone to treat you right. And that shift, that calm detachment, is when everything begins to change. We live in a world that tells you to care deeply, to hold on, to fight for people. And there's beauty in loyalty, in vulnerability, in love. But not when it costs you your peace. Not when it leaves you broken every time they walk away and come back. Like you're just an option they can pick up whenever it suits them. That's where detachment becomes your strength. It's not about turning off your heart. It's about turning up your awareness. It's recognizing the difference between emotional investment and emotional self-destruction. The less you react, the more you begin to see. When you're no longer entangled in their drama or chasing their validation, the truth becomes clearer. You start to realize how many of their actions were about control, how they would push your buttons just to get a reaction, just to know they still had power over you. And when you stop giving them that reaction, they lose that power. It unnerves them, it unsettles them. Because suddenly, you're no longer predictable. You're not rushing to respond. You're not defending yourself. You're just still, quiet, observant, unaffected. That's when they start to wonder, not just about what's changed, but why. They notice the shift in your energy, the calm in your tone, the absence of emotional fireworks. And it forces them to ask the question they never asked before. Did I go too far? Because as long as you were reacting, they believed you still cared. But when your reactions stop, their confidence starts to crack. That's the beauty of detachment. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's powerful. And what's even more powerful is that it gives you your life back. You stop living in emotional extremes. You stop waking up with anxiety about what they'll say or do next. You stop feeling like your worth is tied to their approval. Detachment gives you space to breathe, to think, to feel your own emotions without being manipulated by theirs. It's a return to self, a return to peace. And you start to realize how heavy it was to carry the weight of their moods, their silence, their inconsistency. You realize you were never supposed to carry that. You were never meant to live on edge, hoping today would be the day they treat you right. That's not love. That's emotional dependency. And detachment breaks that chain. It reminds you that you can care deeply without being consumed. That you can love someone and still choose yourself. That your peace isn't up for negotiation. They may try to provoke you again. They may push, test, bait you. Not because they care about you, but because they care about how much control they still have. Don't fall for it. Don't let their chaos pull you back into the storm you finally stepped out of. Stay quiet. Stay steady. That unnerving calm, that's your power now. Because here's the truth: when they can no longer manipulate your emotions, they realize they never really had you. They only had access to the parts of you that were hurting, the parts that were trying to be enough, the parts that thought if you just gave more, explained more, stayed longer, they'd change. But now those parts are healing. And healing doesn't look like shouting. It looks like silence, like boundaries, like walking away without a speech. Just peace. You're no longer dancing to their tune. You're not performing for their validation. You're sitting in your own presence, your own power, and they can feel that. They don't know what you're thinking anymore, and that mystery, that's what starts to break them. Because they can't fix what they can't see. They can't control what they can't predict. And you're no longer trying to be understood by someone who never really listened. You've mastered something rare, emotional discipline, and that will always be more powerful than emotional outbursts. Let them wonder. Let them miss the old version of you they could control. That version is gone. This one moves in silence and speaks only through peace. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop reminding people what they lost, and simply let them feel it. You don't need to post quotes. You don't need to send long messages. You don't need to explain what they did or didn't do. You just leave quietly, completely, and you let the absence speak. Because people don't truly value something while they still have unlimited access to it. They get comfortable. They start assuming you'll always be there, that your love, your loyalty, your energy, it's just part of their life now, like background music. Predictable, constant, and they don't think twice about how much you give, how much you sacrifice, how much of yourself you pour into them. Until one day you stop. It's not revenge, it's not manipulation, it's simply clarity, a point where your soul gets tired, where your heart gets quiet, where you finally realize you've been trying to fill a space in someone's life that they were never going to make room for. So you gather what's left of your dignity, your strength, and you walk away not to teach them a lesson, but to give yourself peace. And in doing that, you give them something far more powerful than your presence ever did, the experience of losing you. That's when the shift happens, when they scroll through old photos, reread old messages, hear your name in passing, and it hits them. That ache, that void, that emptiness where your energy used to be, and they start to feel what you felt all along. The absence, the lack, the longing, but now it's on their side. Now they're the ones wondering why you stopped trying, why you stopped showing up, why the person who once gave everything is suddenly nowhere to be found. Let them feel it. Let them sit in that silence you used to fill. Let them look around at the space you left behind and realize it was never small. It was never insignificant. It was real and it mattered, and they never saw it until it was gone. Because the truth is, some people can't hear your pain. They can't see your effort. They can't understand your love until it's no longer theirs to ignore. They only learn by absence. They only grow when the comfort is removed, when the option is no longer available, when the phone doesn't light up, when your name doesn't appear, when your voice doesn't follow. And yes, there's a part of you that wants them to feel it. Not out of hatred, not out of bitterness, but because your love deserved to be felt. Your presence deserved to be appreciated. Your loyalty deserved to be honored, and if it couldn't happen while you were standing in front of them, then maybe, just maybe, it can happen now in the empty space you left behind. But don't wait for it. Don't sit by hoping they'll finally realize. That's not your job anymore. Your job is to move forward, quietly, gracefully, powerfully, because you can't heal in the same environment that hurt you. You can't keep pouring into a cup that never once tried to fill you back. And you definitely can't teach someone your worth by lowering your value just to keep them close. Let them feel it. Let them feel the silence where your laughter used to be. Let them feel the quiet where your comfort once lived. Let them notice the difference between the version of themselves who had your presence and the version who doesn't. Let them sit with the echoes of the things they took for granted. That's the only language some people understand. Not speeches, not confrontations, just loss. And maybe one day they'll see it. Maybe they'll recognize the gift they were handed, the love they ignored, the loyalty they wasted, the peace they disturbed. Maybe, but whether they do or don't is no longer your burden to carry. That belongs to them now. You gave what you could. You stayed longer than you should have. You tried harder than most would. And now you're done trying. You're done explaining. You're done begging for basic respect. Because you finally learned that people don't change when they hurt you. They change when they lose you. So let them feel it.